There's a rapidly growing subgenre of mystery games that aim in part to emulate real-world investigations and have consequently been dubbed detective games. But as a genre, detective has proven to be a bit of a nebulous term that encapsulates everything from a hard-boiled CRPG like Disco Elysium to Duck Detective. Evidently, while many of the titles under this umbrella are certainly good games, they're not necessarily all good detective games. That label, I think, belongs not to the games where you're simply a detective or investigator in name, while deductions are spoon-fed to you, but the games that truly make you feel like a detective cracking a case. The Painscreek Killings is one such example, and in this video I'd like to explain what sets this criminally underrated title apart from its contemporaries, and why I think it's one of, if not the best detective game out there. What is the Painscreek Killings? Released in 2017 by indie game developer EQ Studios, the Painscreek Killings is a quote-unquote story-rich murder mystery investigation game. This description is a bit oversimplified, almost deceptively so, but let's put a pin in that. On the surface, the game's premise is simple. The year is 1999. You are a reporter sent to the abandoned town of Painscreek and tasked with solving a 4-year-old cold case, the murder of businesswoman and former mayor's wife Vivian Roberts. You start the game with a correspondence from your boss that provides 3 questions you'll need to answer. Who killed Vivian Roberts? What was the motive? And what was the murder weapon? Following a brief tutorial at the sheriff's office that teaches you the basic controls and tools at your disposal, as well as providing you one of the few times you'll hear a voice in this town.
Hi, this is Steven. I just wanted to make sure the package was sent. Again, I'm currently at Anne's courtyard. Any extra info you have would be much appreciated. Thank you very much. Talk to you later.
You unlock the gate and finally enter Painscreek proper. After that, you're on your own. No quest log, no objective markers on the map, just you, your camera, and your notes. And trust me, you're going to need both. The Steam page is adamant that this game will not hold your hand. No doubt you're in for an unforgiving experience. Except that's not quite accurate. Allow me to illustrate. Once you cross the bridge onto the streets of Painscreek, the question of the hour is, what now? By now, you've picked up a couple things from the sheriff's office. You could check the map, which places you closest to the post office and Anne's courtyard. You may have already noted that the guy on the answering machine, Steven, mentioned he was at Anne's courtyard. You could also just pick a direction and start exploring. You go to open the first door you see and it's locked. You'll be seeing this dialogue a lot throughout your playthrough. The town is closed for good after all. Regardless, all roads eventually lead to the town square, and smack dab in the middle is one Black Pine Road, Anne's courtyard. You try that door and jackpot. Hopefully you see now how the game subtly steers the player towards certain places of interest. It's true that the game won't hold your hand, but it's far from unapproachable. Inside Anne's courtyard, besides more leads to follow, you'll probably find that this is kinda spooky. Did I mention this is a horror game? A quick aside about me. I am terrible with horror in games. Like, I have fully uninstalled games before because they were just too scary.
I fear no man, but that thing, it scares me.
I really enjoy horror in film and television, but I just can't handle truly scary games for whatever reason. At least not without a buffer like watching a Let's Play. I guess because playing them makes me feel like I'm the one in danger.
Nope.
All of this is to say that this game made my skin crawl. And while it may be a walking simulator mechanically, it's worth analyzing its very intentional game design and how it makes for a truly one-of-a-kind detective experience. The Painscreek Killings is genius, and here's why. What really sets the Painscreek Killings apart from other detective games is that it understands that sometimes being a detective kind of sucks. In most detective games, the player's role is like that of a junior detective shouting a mentor, sometimes literally, that does all the work for you and just lets you do all the cool, fun stuff like yelling at suspects.
No, that's wrong!
Whereas the Painscreek Killings really makes you feel like you're a detective doing a thankless job, and you're depressed and jaded and your wife left. In all seriousness, the game's greatest strength is that it trusts you to figure things out on your own. Returning to that example of the game guiding you to a certain location, In a lesser game, the moment you finish listening to that voicemail, the player character would say something like, Anne's Courtyard, wonder what I'll find there. And you get a pop-up letting you know your new objective is to go to Anne's Courtyard. Then the map would update to show you exactly how to get there, along with a million other UI elements to ensure you can't possibly miss it. While it's not an inherently bad thing for a game to assist a player like this, at best, the sort of obtrusive game design trivializes any sense of challenge, and at worst, it's patronizing. I think more game developers could stand to exercise restraint and allow the player to make organic discoveries or deductions rather than obsessively prompting them lest they miss an important detail. In combination with the breadcrumb system, as the developers put it, this approach guides players down the right path while still making them feel like they're the ones in the driver's seat, which is exactly the kind of feeling a game like this should elicit. Of course, there are downsides to this hands-off approach to detective game design. I'll be the first to admit that this game is frustrating at times. If you haven't already hit a wall, after a while the tedium of backtracking across town over and over starts to get to you. At this point in my playthrough, I had many bright ideas on how to make the game a more enjoyable experience. If only the walking speed were faster, if only the layout of the town weren't so confusing, if only it were about a young witch trying to solve the disappearance of her neighbor's cat in a small village in the Alps. Things came to a head a couple hours into my playthrough when I felt completely and utterly stuck. I felt like I'd searched everywhere and exhausted every possible lead given to me. Honestly, I seriously considered giving up at this point, accepting that the Painscreek Killings wasn't for me and watching a let's play of the rest of the game. It wouldn't have been the first time I'd done something like that, but there's this nagging feeling that I couldn't stop here. I mean, I had murders, plural, to solve. And this is what I mean when I say the Painscreek Killings truly makes you feel like a detective, because never have I been so compelled to keep playing a game that felt like it was actively out to get me, and all because I wanted to uncover the mystery. So I decided to press on, and after shamefully consulting a guide, imagine my reaction when the key to solving my problem was literally this key in my inventory. Apparently, I'd just forgotten where to use it, and like a true gamer, my first impulse was to blame the game itself. Like, when you first find the key, it's clearly labeled the storage room key, so why wouldn't it be labeled as such in the inventory? Like, I was genuinely aggravated by this, and so I took a step back and asked myself, do keys in real life have an indicator telling you this is your house key? Obviously not, so I knew I had no one to blame but myself. That's when it finally dawned on me. I'm kind of a dumbass. But really, the problem wasn't the game itself, but the way that I was approaching it. The Painscreek Killings is not supposed to be a fun detective fantasy romp. The game is, first and foremost, a challenge to you, the player. The Steam page outright says something to that effect. Can you expose the truth behind this town's dark secrets? Thus, I believe the game is meant to test you, to test your patience, your attention to detail, even your sanity. Once I understood this, the game really clicked for me. Now, I won't pretend that I didn't touch a walkthrough again, but every time I did, it was obvious why and how I went wrong. And I can't stress enough how much you shouldn't use a guide, because it really does rob you of all the fun. The game shines the most during those light bulb moments when you know exactly how one clue connects to another, or when you're chasing after a lead. While the game certainly isn't as flashy as your average detective game, often the act of frantically taking down notes after making a discovery or snapping photos of crucial evidence could feel just as exhilarating. Speaking of, the camera is a brilliant piece of game design. Most detective games will have an evidence list, usually in the form of some UI organizing all the information the player has gathered thus far, alongside brief descriptions putting the evidence into context. These screens are all well and good, but the problem is that they leave no room for uncertainty about which pieces of evidence are important. If something is added to these lists, you know it must be relevant to your investigation. The Painscreek Killings avoids this issue by foregoing an evidence list altogether in favor of the camera, and what's so great about the camera is that it allows you to decide what's important. Of course, you may be distracted by red herrings or even neglect important clues, but it's incredibly satisfying whenever you find that you already have just what you need in your camera roll. Also, the fact that the camera is actually on your person in the game is a nice touch of immersion. Continuing on the topic of games giving away too much information, I feel I should mention that the Painscreek Killings is guilty of this to an extent. Anytime you find diaries, newspapers, etc., you'll see this message pop up, content recorded. This means it was just added to the journal, where you can reference all the documents you found at any time. I wouldn't say the addition of the journal betrays the developer's ethos though, because it's almost certainly the result of playtesting revealing a need for it. Besides, you'll quickly find that many of the journal documents are redundant anyway, so I think the Painscreek Killings remains a shining example of how games can unobtrusively and organically relay information to the player. You've probably noticed that I haven't really delved at all into the story of the Painscreek Killings in this video. That's because my hope is to encourage as many people as possible to try it out for themselves, and importantly, go into it blind. I will say that for a story told almost entirely through diary entries, the writers do a good job of making you feel for the characters, as you don't just learn about their fates or their involvement in the murders, but their hopes and aspirations and regrets and fears. You really start to feel sorry for the people of Painscreek and the tragedies that befell them. And I still get a bit emotional when I think about certain journal entries. Alas, all good stories must come to an end, which brings us to my next point, or I should say, point of contention. In defense of the ending, it goes without saying that I can't really talk about the ending without spoiling things, so obligatory spoiler warning. Now, unpopular opinion, but I actually like the ending of the Painscreek Killings. Okay, is it a little goofy?
Why are you running? Why are you running?
Yes, but I think the notion that it ruins the game is a bit unfair. From what I've seen, criticism of the ending tends to fall into three categories. 1. The horror/chase sequence is too much tonal whiplash. I mostly disagree because I think from the very beginning of the game it's clear that there's something eerie going on in Painscreek. Even if you somehow manage to miss every single one of the supernatural occurrences like I did, there are more subtle scares. In fact, one of my favorite moments in the game is when you finally reach the cemetery after having the gate code at the back of your mind from the very beginning, only to find out that the gate is unlocked. I think the message is clear: you're not alone in Painscreek, and the game plays on this sense of paranoia throughout. With that said, I do see how players could be lulled into a false sense of security, as the horror elements of the game aren't really advertised. Honestly, I think the devs should have fully leaned into the horror angle and added more scares into the mix. For example, once I realized that all the houses inexplicably had power still, I made it a habit of turning on the lights every single time I entered a room, and I was so paranoid that I kept bracing myself for a moment when I'd return and the light I'd turned on was back off, or like a door I'd opened had been closed. You know, just psychological horror things. 2. The ending rather unceremoniously gives away the killer. I think criticism that the ending prevents you from solving the mystery on your own, while warranted, are somewhat undercut by the fact that not only is it entirely feasible to ascertain the killer's identity long before it's revealed to you, but also you can leave Painscreek and end the game at any point. Of course, you won't get the true ending this way, but the point stands that it's up to the player to decide when they've solved the mystery. And isn't that exactly what you'd want from a detective game? I was generally a bit confused that this specific criticism kept popping up, because I'm not sure what the better alternative would be. Like, okay, let's say we completely cut out the smoking gun segment. Now the game just waits until after you submit your answer to tell you, good job, you cracked the case. Yeah, I can't imagine that'd be very satisfying either. I feel like part of the appeal of detective games is knowing that your solution is 100% correct, which usually comes in the form of a confession. I mean, isn't that what real life detectives are trying to get out of their suspects? So ultimately, I think the killer reveal here isn't meant to solve the mystery for you, but rather, hopefully, confirm your suspicions. 3. The ending is bad mechanically. I actually have to agree with this point because the chase sequence is kind of a silly set piece to begin with. You can really tell the developers were stretching the limits of what they were able to do in the engine, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't have my heart racing when I first played it. Still, it was a bit clunkily designed, as it turns out you're not supposed to use the tools to break the chain on the door, but instead escape the church through the previously inaccessible exit that's just open now, and also connects to the sewers for some reason. Overall, I can understand why people dislike the ending so much, but I thought it was a pretty fun payoff to the tension that's been building since the moment you first stepped foot into Painscreek. But as much as I'm willing to defend some of its most controversial game design decisions, the Painscreek Killings isn't without its faults. Namely, I think there are a few puzzles that could be better designed, and I'm sure for many players the chase sequence did come out of left field since there's very little build up to it. Also, besides the intended ending where you uncover all the town's secrets, The other endings, if you could even really call them that, are too generic and just not particularly interesting. There's also a couple bugs in general jank, but that's forgivable in an indie game made by a handful of people. In conclusion, while the Painscreek Killings is not a perfect game by any means, I think it succeeds in what it sets out to do, and regardless, I'll always be rooting for games that try to push the envelope of what games can be, whether in terms of genre or the medium as a whole. I'm also always a fan of games that make you take notes. I don't know, I just think it's neat when digital software forces you to interact with it beyond simply pressing buttons. So, in short, Painscreek Killings is truly the pathologic of detective games.